So this is how I see the progression of values-based ERP. So in the beginning, we are very clearly getting in touch with the trigger, and then we're literally pausing if possible. In life, you might not be able to pause so easily, but if you can, you're pausing, you're working, clearly working on diffusion for a little bit, acceptance for a little bit, coming back to the present moment. Everything's kind of very step by step, and it might be quite extended. If you're dealing with a lot of anxiety, for example, you might really practice name for 5 minutes at that point and really build up that acceptance. Or, if you're really struggling with diffusion, you might work diffusion for a few minutes and, just keep noticing naming and refocusing for a little while. Then the second step, the second stage is really crunching that down. So we might still be getting in touch with the trigger and then doing the skills, but we're doing them quicker and more quicker and more flexibly. And then the final stage is actually we're not needing to sort of pause and come away from the exposure. We're in touch with the exposure and doing our skills at the same time. So an example of this might be, watching a video. In the beginning, as many of you have done with me in session, we're literally pausing the video, working our skills, then coming back and playing the video again, and we're doing that quite extended. And then the middle stage, we're doing a briefer version. We're pausing the video for a few seconds and then coming back. And then the final step is like me. I challenged myself to watch good old Silence of the Lambs the other day for a nice little bit of exposure practice. I'm not a horror movie fan, but I always like to do something like that every so often. And so I was just watching the whole of the movie, but I was using my skills as I noticed tension building, or I noticed, disgust at certain scenes or whatever it might be. I was, using my skills. It was just happening, really. I wasn't kind of, actively doing it, but it was happening, as I watched it. Whereas earlier on in recovery, I might have paused that whenever there was one of the very intense scenes, paused it, worked my skills for a little bit, and then played it again. So do you see what I mean? And I'm really emphasizing this a bit tonight because lots of people have asked me, well, what's the difference between values-based exposure and dipping in and out of the stream? Well, this is values-based exposure. So it's using our skills in ERP, essentially. And then we might pause and we might, slow things down to do this. Whereas dipping in and out of the stream is only about the mental compulsions, only about activating mental compulsions and then doing our skills to get out of mental compulsions, then going back into mental compulsions, then coming out of them. So this is how they're different practices. They can look similar because sometimes you might be doing exposure to verbal thoughts and you might be slowing down and doing your skills for a bit and then getting back in touch with verbal thoughts. So in that sense, that could look very similar, but it's still different because in values-based exposure, the verbal thoughts would not be the compulsions, they would be the obsessions that we would be doing exposure to there, not the compulsions. So does that make sense to everyone, that there's sort of difference there? Now, dipping in and out the stream is something to do if you really struggle with mental compulsions or attentional compulsions like threat monitoring. If you're getting caught up in that, then it's worth spending time with that. And I think it's a way of shortcutting what took me quite a long time to learn diffusion through a kind of more mindfulness meditative approach. I think it's a shorter process of learning that and quicker. And it's something that Russ Harris has sort of brought into act in the last sort of few years, really. But I really like it. I think it's really useful for OCD. But our most important thing really is the values-based ERP, is building up our foundational skills and then doing lots of that eventually. So if you don't have time to do everything, probably the values-based ERP is the place to spend your time. But if you want the best results, do your skills, do values-based ERP, do dipping in and out the stream, and also be on it in the moment.